I learned a long time ago that silence is safer than explanation. For 7 years, I lived in Silverbrook like a ghost, clocking in at a job that required sweat rather than status. I was content being invisible. Then the invitation to the Marlowe Capital Charity Gala arrived, heavy and cream-colored, daring me to come watch my father accept an award for being the one thing he never actually was, a good man. The fluorescent lights of the Silverbrook Logistics Center hummed with a sound that most people found irritating, but I found it grounding. It was a consistent frequency. You could count on it. My life at 33 was built entirely around things I could verify, touch, and organize. I stood at the end of aisle 4 with a clipboard in my hand, checking a shipment of industrial intake valves against the manifest. The air smelled of cardboard dust and packing tape, a scent that was honest in a way nothing in my previous life had ever been. My name is Vivian Bryant, though around here, I was just Viv, the woman who ran the floor with quiet efficiency and never talked about where she came from. The other shift managers knew I had a past, but they assumed it was the usual kind of tragedy, a bad divorce, a bankruptcy, or just a desire to start over in a city where rent was manageable. They were right about the starting over part. They were wrong about the rest. I finished the count. 150 units, exactly as promised. I signed the bottom of the sheet, satisfied by the clean, sharp line of black ink. That satisfaction lasted exactly until I got home to my third-floor walk-up. It was a tidy apartment, filled with second-hand furniture I had refinished myself. I liked stripping away old varnish to find the real wood underneath. It felt metaphoric, even if I would never say that out loud. The envelope was waiting in my mailbox. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with my name written in calligraphy that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I knew the handwriting on the return address, or rather, I knew the specific slant of the personal assistant who had written it. It was an invitation to the Marlowe Capital Charity Gala. I should have thrown it in the trash. That was the protocol I had established 5 years ago when I walked away from the Bryant estate with 2 suitcases and a distinct lack of a trust fund, but there was a sticky note attached to the front, written in the frantic, looped scrawl of my cousin, Bethany, Vivian, please just come. He is receiving the Legacy Award. Everyone is asking about you. Just show up, apologize for the silence, and let us be a family again. It has been long enough. Apologize. The words sat in my chest like a swallowed stone. In the world my father, Gordon Bryant, had built, apology was the currency of the weak. He demanded it, hoarded it, and never dispensed it. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the invitation. The gala was tomorrow night. Gordon Bryant, the Lion of Silverbrook, the executive genius behind Marlowe Capital, was being honored for his philanthropic contributions to the city. It was a joke, of course. My father did not give money away. He invested it in his own reputation. Every dollar he donated was a billboard purchasing silence or adoration. I should not go. I knew that. But the silence Bethany mentioned was starting to feel heavy. I heard things through the grapevine, whispers that I was sick, that I was unstable, that I had run off to join a cult, or was living in squalor because I could not hack the pressure of high society. My father controlled the narrative because I was not there to contradict it. I am tired of being a rumor. I thought, placing the invitation on the counter. I would go. I would wear a dress I already owned. I would stand in the back. I would drink 1 glass of sparkling water, nod at the people who remembered me, and prove that I was sane, employed, and entirely indifferent to Gordon Bryant's approval. I would be polite, invisible, and gone in 60 minutes. It was a plan that relied on the assumption that my father would let me be invisible. I should have known better. The grand ballroom of the Silverbrook Ritz-Carlton was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that required expensive jackets, and the room smelled of lilies and predatory ambition. I walked in 10 minutes late, hoping to slip into the crush of bodies near the bar. I wore a navy sheath dress, simple and tailored. It was not the latest season from Paris, but it fit. I had pulled my dark hair back into a low knot. I looked like what I was, a working professional who did not need to scream for attention. The room was packed. 300 of the city's wealthiest residents were swirling around, clutching champagne flutes and trading leverage disguised as conversation. I saw faces I recognized from my 20s, men who had aged into their father's jowls, women who looked brittle and anxious. I moved through the crowd like water, avoiding eye contact. I made it to the edge of the room. Finding a spot behind a massive floral arrangement, I had a clear view of the stage. A banner hung above it. Marlowe Capital celebrates Gordon Bryant. My stomach turned over. But I kept my face blank. I was safe here, just a spectator. Then the lights dimmed, and the crowd hushed. A spotlight hit the stage, and there he was. Gordon Bryant looked exactly the same as the day I left. Perhaps even better. He was 62, but he wore his age like armor. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed. His tuxedo fit across his broad shoulders without a wrinkle, and his smile was the one that had sold 1,000 bad deals. Warm, reassuring, and completely hollow. He took the microphone to thunderous applause. I watched him soak it in. He did not just enjoy the attention, he metabolized it. It was his oxygen. "Thank you," he said, his voice booming with that practiced baritone resonance. "Thank you all. They tell me this award is for generosity. But I tell you, the only true generosity is the discipline to build something that lasts." The crowd murmured agreement. He launched into his standard speech, the one about pulling himself up by his bootstraps, about the sanctity of hard work, about how he built Marlowe Capital from a single desk and a telephone. It was a good story. Parts of it were even true. But he left out the loans he never repaid, the partners he pushed out, and the family he treated like employees who were failing their performance reviews. I checked my watch. 20 minutes down, 40 to go. And then, disaster struck. The house lights came up slightly as he transitioned to the Q&A portion of the evening, a narcissistic tradition he insisted on. He wanted to parry with the audience, to show his wit. He scanned the room, looking for a friendly face to toss him a softball question. His eyes swept over the front tables, then the middle, and then, inexplicably, they locked on the back corner. They locked on me. I saw the recognition hit him. It was physical. His posture stiffened for a microsecond, and then a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a cat that had just found a mouse stupid enough to walk into the open. "Well," he said, and the amplification system carried the wet sound of his amusement to every corner of the room. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence." 300 heads turned. The spotlight operator, sensing a moment, swung the beam wildly until it hit the back of the room. I was blinded by the sudden white glare. I instinctively raised a hand to shield my eyes, which must have looked like I was waving. "My daughter." "Vivian." "Folks," Gordon announced. There was a scattering of polite applause, confused and hesitant. "I have not seen Vivian in years." He continued, stepping out from behind the podium. He held the microphone casually, like a lounge singer. "She decided a long time ago that the world of business and higher thinking was a bit too demanding for her tastes." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I planted my feet. I would not run. I lowered my hand and looked straight at him, even though I knew he could not see my eyes through the glare. "Vivian prefers the simple life," Gordon said, chuckling. The crowd chuckled with him, relieved that it was a joke. "We tried, didn't we? We tried to get her through those degree programs, tried to get her set up in the firm, but some people just are not built for the pressure of intellect." He was improvising now, feeding off the energy in the room. He walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at the donors who were eating out of his hand. "It is a tragedy." "Really?" he said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was meant to convey sorrow, but only conveyed contempt. "To have all the opportunity in the world and walk away because you would rather be unburdened, uneducated." The word hung in the air. Uneducated. "It is hard for a father," he said, sighing. "You build a legacy, and you realize your own flesh and blood is just worthless to the cause. But hey, At least she showed up for the free champagne, right? Laughter, rippling, genuine laughter. They thought he was charming. They thought he was a beleaguered father dealing with a lazy, leeching child. He had turned me into a punchline to make himself look like a martyr. I stood there, burning. My instinct, the old instinct, the one I had lived with for 25 years, was to shrink, to crumble, to run out the side door and cry in the parking lot while the valet looked at me with pity. But something strange happened. As the laughter washed over me, the heat in my face cooled. The frantic pounding in my chest slowed down into a heavy, rhythmic thud. I looked at him, really looked at him, standing there in his tuxedo, grinning at his own cruelty. He was not doing this because he was strong. He was doing this because he was terrified. He needed to define me as worthless. If I was worthless, then my absence did not matter. If I was stupid, then my rejection of him was not a moral judgment. It was just a failure of my capacity. He had to belittle me publicly because if he admitted for 1 second that I was a competent, rational adult who chose to leave him, his entire worldview would fracture. He did not know me. He did not know I ran a logistics floor with 0 error rate. He did not know about the online degree I had finished 2 years ago, graduating summa cum laude while working 45 hours a week. He did not know I spoke 3 languages now, or that I had taught myself forensic accounting basics just to understand how he had hidden assets during his second divorce. He was mocking a ghost. I did not smile, but I did not frown either. I just stared at him. I stood up straighter. I let the spotlight hit me. And I refused to fidget. Gordon waited for me to run. When I didn't, he faltered. Just for a second. He cleared his throat. The timing off. Anyway, he said, turning back to the podium, his voice slightly louder, slightly more brittle, back to the future of the foundation. The spotlight swung away. The room turned back to him. The moment was over. I stayed for 5 more minutes, just to prove I could. Then, I turned and walked out the double doors, my heels clicking on the marble with a steady, deliberate rhythm. I made it to the lobby, my adrenaline finally beginning to ebb, leaving my hands trembling slightly. I needed air. I walked toward the main exit, intending to call a cab and never look back. Ms. Bryant? The voice was cool, low, and feminine. I turned. A woman was standing near a pillar, holding a tablet. She was tall, perhaps 40, with hair cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob that looked dangerous. She wore a gray suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life. She did not look like a donor. She looked like a surgeon. I am leaving. I said, I am not with the press, she said. Her eyes were dark and assessed me with a frightening intensity. My name is Daphne Rourke. I do not know you. No, you do not. She stepped closer. She did not offer a hand to shake. She just looked at me. That was quite a performance inside. He loves an audience, I said, keeping my voice flat. I was not talking about him. She said, I was talking about you. Most people would have crumbled. You stood still. It was interesting. What do you want? Daphne tapped her tablet screen, then looked up at me. I have a question. It is a strange one, so bear with me. I waited. In 2018, she said, you were listed as an administrative assistant at one of your father's subsidiary firms for 3 months, a shipping logistics company. I stiffened. That was a lifetime ago. I quit. I know. But before you quit, the efficiency rating of that branch went up by 14%. The routing schedules were completely overhauled. The manager took credit for it, of course, but the timestamps on the digital logs show the changes were made from a user terminal assigned to the front desk. She paused, tilting her head. Did you write the code for the routing algorithm? She asked. The question was so specific, so technical, and so completely at odds with the uneducated narrative my father had just spun that I was stunned into silence. I did not write code. I said carefully, I just used an existing Excel macro and optimized it. It was basic logic. Basic logic, she repeated. She looked at me for a long moment, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle. You are not who he says you are you? He says a lot of things. Daphne nodded. A sharp, single motion. Go home. Ms. Bryant. It was a pleasure to meet you. She turned and walked away toward the elevators before I could ask another question. I took a cab home. The city lights blurred past the window. Streaks of neon and white. I felt unmoored. The humiliation in the ballroom still stung, no matter how strong you are. It hurts to have your father call you worthless in front of a crowd, but the encounter with Daphne was vibrating in my mind. Why would a stranger care about shipping logs from 5 years ago? I climbed the stairs to my apartment, my feet heavy. I just wanted to take off the dress, wash my face, and go back to being Viv from the warehouse. I wanted to forget Gordon Bryant existed. I unlocked my door and stepped into the dark living room. I reached for the light switch, but stopped. Something white was lying on the floor, just inside the threshold. It was an envelope, plain, white, legal-sized. It had been slid under the door while I was out. I turned on the light and locked the door behind me. I picked up the envelope. It had no return address, no stamp, just my name, typed on a label. I carried it to the kitchen island. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands shaking again. I told myself it was probably a lease update from the landlord, or a flyer. I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It looked like a photocopy of a financial spreadsheet. It was dense with numbers, dates, account transfers, routing codes. At the top, there was a header. Marlowe Capital, Internal Audit, Draft. I did not understand what I was looking at. Columns of figures, amounts in the millions, but 3 rows were highlighted in yellow marker. They were transfers to a company called Silverbrook Futures. I knew that name. It was the charity arm my father had been bragging about tonight. But the column next to the transfers was labeled Source, and the codes listed there were not donor codes. They were marked with a tag that I recognized from my own self-study of accounting standards. They were tagged as Client Escrow. If I was reading this right, and I prayed I was not, it looked like Marlowe Capital was moving client money. Money that was supposed to be locked and secure, into the charity fund. That was illegal. That was embezzlement masked as philanthropy. I turned the paper over. There was a handwritten note on the back, in blue ink. The handwriting was sharp and angular. If you want the truth, stop pretending you are small. I dropped the paper as if it were burning. The silence of my apartment suddenly felt very loud. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. It was empty. My heart was racing. This was dangerous. If my father was moving client money, he was committing a felony. If someone knew about it, why were they sending it to me? I was nobody. I was the uneducated daughter. I was the punchline. I looked back at the paper. Stop pretending you are small. The anger flared up again, hotter this time. It mixed with the memory of his laugh in the ballroom. Uneducated, worthless. He thought I was too stupid to understand what he did. He thought I was safe to mock because I had no power. I looked at the spreadsheet again. I understood the numbers. I understood the flow of funds. I could see the pattern because I had spent the last 5 years obsessing over details, over manifests, over the truth of where things came from and where they went. I was not the person I used to be. I was not the scared girl who ran away. I walked into my bedroom and pulled my laptop out from under the bed. It was a powerful machine, one I had bought with my bonus last year. I sat down at my small desk and opened the lid. The screen glowed blue, illuminating my face. I was terrified. I knew that if I pulled on this thread, it would not just unravel my quiet life. It would pull me back into the orbit of a man who knew exactly how to hurt me. But I also knew I could not unsee what was on that paper. I was not going to call the police. Not yet. I did not know enough. And I was not going to call Bethany or my mother. I was going to find out who sent this. I was going to find out why Daphne Rourke knew about my logistics logs. And I was going to find out if the great Gordon Bryant was a fraud. I typed in a search query for Silverbrook Futures Fund tax filings. My fingers were steady. I am not small. I whispered to the empty room, and for the first time in years, I believed it. The coffee shop Daphne Rourke had chosen was 3 blocks from the financial district. tucked into a brick alleyway that smelled of rain and roasted beans. It was called the Foundry, a place where people brought laptops and wore noise-canceling headphones to signal they were not interested in conversation. It was neutral ground. I arrived 5 minutes early, a habit ingrained in me from years of logistics work. If you are on time, you're late. If you're early, you're prepared. I ordered a black coffee and found a table in the back corner, away from the windows. Daphne walked in at 10 o'clock exactly. She wore a different suit today, a charcoal gray number with a silk blouse the color of ice. She carried no bag, just that same thin tablet. She spotted me instantly, her eyes scanning the room with a predator's efficiency, and slid into the chair opposite me without a greeting. "You came," she said. It was not a question. "I told you I would," I replied, keeping my hands wrapped around the warm ceramic mug. "I want to know why you have shipping logs from my old job, and I want to know why you think I'm pretending to be small." Daphne signaled a waiter with a subtle lift of her chin and ordered a sparkling water. She waited until he left before she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "I work for an oversight group representing a consortium of creditors," she said. Her voice was low, barely carrying over the hum of the espresso machine. "Banks, private equity firms, institutional investors, people who lend very large amounts of money to firms like Marlowe Capital. My father's firm is profitable," I said. "It is the gold standard in this city." "It reports profitability," Daphne corrected. "There is a difference. For the last 18 months, our algorithms have flagged a series of irregularities in Marlowe's quarterly filings. Nothing overt, just drift. Documentation that goes missing and reappears with different timestamps. Client funds being reclassified as operating capital for 48 hours before being moved back. And most notably, a sudden, statistically improbable growth in the personal assets of 3 senior executives. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. "My father. You think he is stealing?" I said. "I think he, or someone in his inner circle, is moving money to cover a hole that is getting bigger every day." Daphne said, "We are preparing to audit them, but audits are slow, and they give the target time to shred paper and wipe servers. We need to know where to look before we serve the warrant. We need a map, and you think I have it?" I almost laughed, but it would have sounded bitter. "Daphne, I have not stepped foot in Marlowe Capital in 7 years. My father thinks I'm an idiot. I am the last person who would have a map." "I know," Daphne said. "That is what makes you interesting." She tapped her tablet, swiped twice, and turned it to face me. It was a screenshot of an internal email chain from inside Marlowe Capital. The subject line was RE, Compliance Risk Assessment, Q3. Most of the text was redacted, black bars swallowing the conversation, but one line was highlighted in yellow. Primary external risk factor remains V. Bryant, ensure containment protocols are active. I stared at the screen. The date on the email was 3 weeks ago. "I do not understand," I said, looking up at her. "I am a warehouse manager. I live in a walk-up. I drive a 6-year-old sedan. How am I a risk factor?" "That is the question." "Isn't it?" Daphne said, retracting the tablet. "Why is Gordon Bryant, a man who controls a billion-dollar portfolio, worried about containing a daughter he publicly dismisses as worthless?" She took a sip of her water, watching me over the rim of the glass. "Unless," she said softly, "you are not worthless." I looked down at my coffee. The liquid was dark and still. I thought about the night classes, the textbooks hidden under my bed so my roommates would not ask questions, the weekends spent writing papers on supply chain economics and corporate law while everyone else was at the bar. I realized then that I had a choice. I could keep playing the role my father had written for me, the sad, simple girl who needed pity, or I could tell the truth. I am not uneducated. I said. My voice was quiet, but steady. Daphne raised an eyebrow. "Go on. I have a Bachelor of Science in Business Analytics from State University." I said, "I finished it 4 years ago. I did it online, at night. I graduated with a 3.9 GPA. I also hold certifications in forensic accounting and supply chain management." "Why hide it?" Daphne asked. Why let him humiliate you on a stage if you have the paper to prove him wrong? Because paper does not matter to Gordon. I said, facts do not matter. When I was 22, I got into a prestigious internship program on my own merits. When I told him, he laughed. He told me the hiring manager only took me because they wanted to get close to him. He made a few calls. And the next day, the offer was rescinded. He told me he did it to protect me from embarrassing myself. I gripped the mug tighter. If I told him I had a degree, he would find a way to taint it. I said, he would say he paid for it, or that the school was a diploma mill, or that I cheated. He weaponizes everything. So I kept it to myself. It is the only thing I own that he has not touched. Daphne studied me for a long moment. Her expression softened. Just a fraction. It was the first genuine emotion I had seen on her face. He is afraid of you, she said. He is ashamed of me, I corrected. No, Daphne said firmly. Men like Gordon Bryant are not ashamed of weakness. They ignore it. They are afraid of competence that they cannot control. He tracks you because he knows you are smart. And he knows you have a reason to hate him. That makes you a threat. She reached into her sleek leather portfolio and pulled out a thin file folder. She slid it across the table. I have a proposition, she said. I opened the folder. It was a contract. The creditors' committee has authorized the hiring of a third-party compliance consultant to assist with a preliminary review of Marlowe's archiving systems. Daphne explained, it is a low-level temporary role, mostly data entry and file organization. Boring work, the kind of work executives ignore. I looked at the salary figure. It was double what I made at the warehouse. I want you to take the job, Daphne said. You want me to spy on my father. I want you to be the person who is in the room when they think no one is watching. She said, they will not guard themselves around you. Vivian, Gordon has spent years convincing everyone, including his staff, that you are limited. They will see you as a nepotism hire. A charity case brought in to keep the family peace. They will talk in front of you. They will leave screens unlocked. And if I say no, then we will eventually get a warrant. Daphne said, but by then, the money will be gone, and the blame will likely be shifted onto someone expendable. Maybe a junior accountant. Maybe you, if they decide to frame the narrative that way. I looked at the contract again. Consultant. It was a clean word. I hesitated. The fear was there, visceral and cold. Walking back into Marlowe Capital felt like walking back into a cage I had chewed my leg off to escape. I was afraid of his voice. I was afraid of the way he could make me feel small with a single look. But then I remembered the GALA. I remembered the spotlight. Uneducated and worthless. If I took this job, I was not going back as his daughter. I was going back as a professional. I was going back as a threat. I will do it, I said. Daphne nodded, as if the outcome had never been in doubt. Good. You start Monday. Monday morning broke with a sky the color of wet slate. I stood in front of the Marlowe Capitol building, a 40-story spire of glass and steel that dominated the Silverbrook skyline. It was beautiful in a cold, aggressive way. It looked like a monument to things that could not be broken. I wore a black blazer and trousers, tailored and sharp. I had spent Sunday afternoon polishing my shoes until I could see my reflection in the leather. Armor. I walked through the revolving doors into the lobby. The air inside was conditioned to a crisp 68 degrees and smelled of white tea and money. The security guard at the desk looked up, bored, until I gave my name. Vivian Bryant, I said. I am here for the compliance orientation. His eyes flicked to his screen, then back to me. His posture straightened. Oh, Ms. Bryant. Yes, we were told to expect you. Mr. Klein asked to be notified the moment you arrived. Mr. Klein? I asked. Rowan Klein, Executive Vice President. I knew the name. Rowan Klein was my father's shadow, the golden boy, the heir apparent. Please, take the private elevator to the 35th floor, the guard said, buzzing me through the turnstile. The elevator ride was smooth and silent. My stomach did a slow roll as the numbers climbed. 20, 30, 35. The door slid open, and I stepped out onto a plush carpet that swallowed the sound of my heels. The reception area was vast, decorated with abstract art that looked like violent slashes of red and black paint. "Vivian!" The voice was warm, smooth, and welcoming. Rowan Klein strode toward me, his hand extended. He was a devastatingly handsome man, perhaps 38, with the kind of jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my car. "Rowan," I said, taking his hand. His grip was firm, dry, and perfectly calibrated to convey confidence. "It is so good to see you," he said, smiling. His teeth were very white. "Your father is in a board meeting, but he told me to roll out the red carpet. We were all so surprised to hear you were interested in the consulting gig. I bet you were. I thought, I am just looking for a change of pace," I said aloud, keeping my tone light. "And the agency said you needed help with the archive migration." Right, Rowan said, guiding me down the hallway. "Boring stuff, really, but critical. We are glad to have you. Truly, it is time the family was back under one roof." He led me past glass-walled offices. I saw people working inside, analysts with 3 monitors, associates pacing while on headsets. The atmosphere was intense. No one was smiling. We passed the main conference room. The glass was frosted, but the door was slightly ajar. I heard a burst of laughter. Then a voice. It was my father. So I told him, "If you want loyalty, buy a dog. If you want results, buy me." The laughter that followed was too loud. It was quick, sharp, and frantic. It was the sound of people who were afraid of what would happen if they did not laugh. I kept walking, my face impassive. Power looks like comfort, I realized, but for everyone else, it looks like fear. Rowan stopped at a cubicle in the corner of the compliance department. It was small, isolated, and faced a blank wall. "Here is your station," he said. "Not the corner office, I am afraid, but we treat the consultants like regular staff. Fairness and all that, it is perfect." I said, "Oh, let me introduce you to your handler," Rowan said. He turned and waved at a woman walking briskly down the aisle. "Elise!" Elise Marrow stopped and pivoted. She was striking, with hair pulled back so tight it pulled at her eyes, giving her a permanent look of skepticism. She was the head of public relations, but everyone knew she was really the fix-it woman. She handled narratives. She buried bodies, metaphorically, and perhaps literally, in terms of careers. "Elise, this is Vivian," Rowan said. Elise looked at me. Her gaze was not warm. It was an appraisal. She was checking for cracks. "Vivian," she said. Her voice was cool. "We met at the GALA. Briefly. You were busy." I said, "I am always busy," she replied. "Welcome to the team. Try not to break anything." She turned and walked away. "Charming, isn't she?" Rowan said with a conspiratorial wink. "She just takes the brand very seriously. Anyway, I will let you get settled. Tech support will be by to set up your credentials." Rowan left, and I sat down in the ergonomic chair. I took a breath. I was in. 10 minutes later, a young man appeared at my desk. He was wearing a hoodie under his blazer, violating the dress code in a way that suggested he was indispensable. He had messy brown hair and glasses that slid down his nose. "Hi," he said. "I'm Miles. IT, here to baptize you into the system. I'm Vivian." I said, "I know," he said, dropping into the spare chair and pulling my keyboard toward him. He didn't say it like the others, with weight or judgment. He just said it like a fact. He began typing rapidly. Usually, we restrict consultant access to the shared drive only, but the order came down to give you Level 2 clearance. "Level 2? I asked. "View access to historical departmental logs," Miles said. "Lucky you. You get to see 10 years of boring memos." He paused, his fingers hovering over the keys. "Wait," he said. "That's weird. What is it?" He frowned at the screen. "Your user profile. It's flagging an error. It says, pending executive approval." "Is that normal?" "No," Miles said. "Usually, HR clears it. This flag, this is an override lock. It means someone at the C-suite level put a hold on your account creation. I felt a pulse of anxiety. Had they changed their minds? Miles tapped a few keys. Let me try to bypass it. Nope. Hard lock. I can't. Suddenly, a hand rested on the back of Miles's chair. We both jumped. It was Rowan. He had returned, silent as a cat. Problem. Miles? Rowan asked. His voice was pleasant, but his eyes were hard. Just a glitch. Sir, Miles said, standing up quickly. The account was locked. Ah, yes, Rowan said. My fault. I wanted to personally verify the confidentiality agreements before we went live. Standard procedure for sensitive hires. He leaned over and typed a password into my terminal. His fingers were manicured. I watched the screen flash green. Access granted. There, Rowan said, straightening up. All set. Miles, why don't you go check the servers on 4? Miles nodded and scrambled away, shooting me a confused glance. Rowan turned to me. Just wanted to make sure everything was perfect. Vivian, we take security very seriously here. He smiled again, that same empty, dazzling smile, and walked away. I sat there, staring at the blinking cursor. That was not standard procedure. Rowan Klein did not handle IT tickets. He was watching me. They were all watching me. I spent the next 4 hours doing exactly what I was hired to do. I organized digital files. I renamed folders. I was boring. I was efficient. I was invisible. By 3 o'clock, the office rhythm had settled. People stopped glancing at my cubicle. I was just the new girl in the corner. I opened the shared drive Miles had mentioned. Historical logs. I started clicking through subfolders, looking for anything related to the Silverbrook Futures Fund. It was tedious work. Thousands of documents. Then, I found a folder labeled HR_archive_temp. It seemed out of place in a compliance directory. I clicked it. Inside was a single PDF file. The file name was just a string of numbers. I opened it. It was a memo, an internal risk assessment from 3 years ago. Subject: Surveillance Report. Subject V. B. My heart stopped. I scrolled down. It was a report on me. It listed my address at the time. It listed my place of employment, the logistics center. It listed my credit score. But then I saw the paragraph that made the room spin. Subject continues to seek medical therapy for chronic migraines at Westside Clinic. Doctor, heiress presiding, prescription for sumatriptan renewed on April 12th. Vulnerability assessment. High. Dependency on employer healthcare is a leverage point. I covered my mouth with my hand to stifle a gasp. I had never told my family about the migraines. I had developed them 2 years after I left home. Stress-induced. The doctor said. I had never told anyone except the doctor. They had my medical records. My father, or someone working for him, had been accessing my private medical history for 3 years. They knew about the pain, they knew about the medication, and they had listed it as a leverage point. I looked at the date on the memo. It was signed by a user ID, EK_PR, EK, Elise Marrow, the PR woman, the narrative handler. She wasn't just handling the company's image, she was handling mine. She was building a dossier to use against me if I ever became a problem. I closed the file instantly. I felt sick. I felt violated. But beneath the nausea, there was something else. A cold, hard realization. Daphne was right. They were not ignoring me. They were terrified of me. You do not build a surveillance dossier on someone you think is worthless. You build it on an enemy. I looked around the office. The hum of conversation. The ringing phones, the click of keyboards, it all looked so normal. But it was a facade. This was not a business. It was a fortress built on secrets. And I was inside. I minimized the window and opened a blank spreadsheet. I started typing data entry codes, my fingers moving automatically. Clack, clack, clack. I would play their game. I would be the quiet, uneducated consultant. I would let them think they had the leverage. But I knew something they didn't. I knew they were watching. And because I knew they were watching, I could control what they saw. I was not just a risk factor anymore. I was a spy. At 5 o'clock, I packed my bag. I walked to the elevator. I nodded to the security guard. "Good night, Ms. Bryant," he said. "Good night," I replied. I walked out into the cool evening air. The city was loud and chaotic, but my mind was clear. I took out my phone and typed a single message to a number I had saved as pizza delivery. "I'm in." "And you were right. They know everything." I hit send, then deleted the message. I merged into the crowd of commuters, just another face in the gray stream of the city, heading home to prepare for war. The first week at Marlowe Capital felt less like an investigation and more like drowning in a sea of beige data. The sheer volume of information was the first line of defense. My job, ostensibly, was to migrate physical archive manifests into a new cloud-based compliance system. It was the kind of work designed to numb the brain. Hours of scanning, tagging, and filing digital receipts from 5 years ago. But boredom is a kind of cover, and I had learned to be very comfortable in the quiet. By Wednesday, I began to see the architecture of the confusion. It was not sloppy. In logistics, when you see a mistake, a crate sent to the wrong dock, a manifest with a missing signature, it usually looks like human error. It is messy. What I was looking at in the Marlowe servers was not messy. It was intricate. It was fractured on purpose. I noticed that vendor payments for something called external consultancies were never processed by a single department. The invoice would arrive in legal, be approved for a partial amount, then routed to operations for the remainder, and finally paid out from a discretionary fund managed by the C-suite. By the time the money left the building, it had changed names 3 times. It went from legal retainer to operational overhead to strategic reserve allocation. It was a shell game played with millions of dollars. And the genius of it was the siloing. The junior analyst in legal saw a legitimate bill. The manager in operations saw a standard expense. No one except the person at the top saw that the same money was moving in a circle, eventually vanishing into accounts that had no clear beneficiary. I was staring at a spreadsheet, tracing a payment of $50,000 that had supposedly gone to a landscaping firm in midwinter, when a shadow fell across my desk. I didn't look up immediately. I finished the cell entry, hit save, and then turned. It was Miles. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the air vent above my cubicle. His posture stiff, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie. "Your screen resolution is off," he said. His voice was flat, almost mechanical. "It looks fine to me." I said, "It is not fine," he insisted, finally glancing down at me. His eyes were wide behind his glasses. "Signaling something urgent. I need to calibrate the color profile. It will only take a second." I realized then that he wasn't talking about the screen. I stood up and stepped aside. Miles sat in my chair. He didn't touch the monitor settings. Instead, his fingers flew across the keyboard. Opening the command terminal, the black box popped up, and he typed a string of code so fast I could barely track it. "Watch the cursor," he murmured. So quietly, I had to lean in to hear him. I watched. On the screen, a line of text appeared. "Remote session active. Admin_root. Someone is ghosting you," Miles whispered. "Ghosting? Mirroring your session," he explained, his eyes darting to the hallway to check for observers. "They can see everything you open. They can see every keystroke. It is a rootkit installation. It is not standard issue. Vivian, this is spy software." I felt a cold flush of violation. I knew they were watching. Daphne had warned me. But seeing the code made it physical. Someone was sitting in another room, breathing, watching me think. "Can you stop it?" I asked. "If I kill it, they will know," Miles said. He typed another command, "But I can loop it. I can set up a script that feeds them a pre-recorded session of you doing benign data entry. They will think they are watching you work live, but you will actually be working in a sandbox environment underneath the feed. Do it," I said. He hit enter with a flourish. The terminal window vanished. "Done," he said. his voice returning to normal volume. That should be much better on the eyes. If you have any more trouble with the resolution, just submit a ticket. Thank you. Miles, I said. He stood up. He paused for a beat, looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Be careful, he whispered. I do not know who you really are, but the data usage on that ghost protocol, it was routing directly to the executive server, the big one. He walked away before I could respond, disappearing back into the hive of the IT department. I sat back down. The screen looked exactly the same, but the feeling had changed. I was no longer a specimen in a jar. I was invisible again, and I had an ally. The relief was short-lived. 2 days later, the staff meeting ran long. It was a quarterly all-hands in the main auditorium, a sleek terraced room that smelled of floor wax. My father held court on the stage, pacing back and forth with a wireless microphone, talking about resilience in the face of market volatility. He was magnetic. He told jokes that made the junior associates roar with laughter. He spoke about family values, about the sanctity of the client trust. I sat in the very back row, near the exit, taking notes on a legal pad. I wrote down the buzzwords he used: transparency, integrity, legacy. When the meeting ended, the room flooded with people eager to get to the catered lunch in the lobby. I waited for the crush to dissipate, intending to slip out the side door. Vivian, the voice cut through the noise of the shuffling crowd like a razor. I stopped. I turned. Gordon was standing at the bottom of the aisle. The stage lights were still on behind him, casting him in silhouette. He was alone. His entourage of assistants had momentarily vanished. He walked up the aisle toward me. He moved with the heavy, inevitable grace of a tank. I thought you would be bored by now, he said. He stopped 2 steps below me, forcing me to look down at him, which somehow only made him seem taller. The work is interesting, I said, keeping my face neutral. I learned to mask my emotions a long time ago. It was a survival skill in the Bryant household. Interesting, he repeated. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that had no humor in it. Filing papers? Organizing receipts? It is beneath you, Vivian, or perhaps it isn't. Perhaps this is exactly where you belong, in the back office, out of sight. I did not take the bait. I am just doing a job. Gordon. He stepped closer. I could smell him. Sandalwood, starch, and the metallic tang of breath mints. You are here to beg. Aren't you? He said softly. His blue eyes bored into mine. You realize that the real world does not care about your little rebellion. You realized that without my name, you are nobody. So you came back to scrape for crumbs, to beg for relevance. It was the same script he had used at the GALA. Worthless, uneducated, nobody. But this time, up close, I saw something else. His hands were in his pockets, but I could see the tension in his forearms. A small vein was pulsing in his temple. He was scanning my face, searching for a reaction. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to yell. Who hired you? He asked. The question came out too fast. It broke the rhythm of his insults. I blinked. I applied through the agency. I lied smoothly. The request came through HR. Which agency? He snapped. Temp Staff Solutions. I said, it was the name on my badge. He stared at me, chewing on the inside of his cheek. He did not believe me, or rather, he did not know if he could believe me. That was the crack. Gordon Bryant knew everything that happened in his building. He knew who was hired, who was fired, and who was sleeping with whom. But he did not know how I had gotten in, and that terrified him. If he knew I was working for Daphne, for the creditors, he would have had me escorted out by security. The fact that I was still standing there meant he was paralyzed by uncertainty. Was I a spy? Was I a repentant daughter? Was I a coincidence? He could not fire me without cause, without drawing attention to me, and attention was the one thing he seemed desperate to avoid. Stay out of my way, he hissed, leaning in until his face was inches from mine. If I find out you are disrupting my team, I will not just fire you. I will make sure you never work in this city again. I am just checking archives, I said calmly. He sneered, turned on his heel, and marched away. I watched him go. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, bird-like rhythm, but my mind was cold. He is scared. I thought, he is not just cruel. He is scared of not controlling the story. He had asked who hired me because he suspected a leak. He suspected that the walls he had built were porous. I went back to my desk and worked with a new intensity. If he was scared, there was a reason. I focused on the external consultancy's payments again. I cross-referenced the dates of the payments with the company's legal calendar. It took me 3 hours, but I found the pattern. August 12th, 2 years ago. A sexual harassment suit is filed against a senior vice president. The case never goes to court. It is settled privately. August 14th, 2 years ago. A payment of $250,000 is made to Obsidian Consulting Group for crisis management services, January 10th. Last year, a whistleblower in the accounting department threatens to go to the SEC regarding asset inflation. He is fired for cause, January 12th. Last year, a payment of $150,000 is made to Bright Path Logistics for infrastructure review. There were 7 of them. 7 incidents where a legal threat or a potential scandal vanished, followed immediately by a massive payout to a generic-sounding company that had no website, no physical address, and no employees. It was a reputation firewall. They were using client funds, money that belonged to pensioners and small business owners, to pay hush money. They were buying silence and billing it as business strategy. I printed the spreadsheet. I folded it into a tiny square and tucked it inside the lining of my bra. It was a cliché, but it was the only place I knew they wouldn't search. The next day, the invitation came. It was not a menacing summon. It was an email from Elise Marrow. Subject: Lunch, Vivian. I would love to take you out today. Catch up properly. We never got a chance to talk at the gala. My treat. Elise, I knew what it was. It was a fishing expedition. Gordon had sent her. I accepted. We met at a bistro down the street, a place with white tablecloths and waiters who whispered the specials. Elise was already seated when I arrived. She looked impeccable, as always. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that made her look like a sculpture carved from butter. Vivian, she said, standing to kiss the air next to my cheek. You look tired. The lighting in that basement is terrible, isn't it? I am fine, I said, sitting down. She ordered a bottle of wine without asking me. A Sancerre. Expensive. So, she said, leaning back and crossing her legs. How is it? Being back? It is quiet, I said. Quiet is good, Elise said. Quiet is safe. Your father. He worries about you. You know, I almost choked on my water. Does he? Of course. He feels responsible. He thinks the pressure of the family name was too much for you. That is why he was so vocal at the gala. It was frustration. He wants you to succeed, but he thinks you are fragile. She watched me closely as she said the word fragile. She was testing the narrative. She wanted to see if I would agree with it. I am not fragile. Elise, I said. No, she said slowly. No. I do not think you are. You seem quite determined. She took a sip of wine. Rowan tells me you are very efficient with the archives. Finding things we all forgot existed. I just organize what is there. I said, You know, Elise said, swirling the wine in her glass. Memory is a funny thing. In my line of work, we learn that the truth is not really about what happened. It is about what people remember. And people remember what we tell them to remember. Is that a philosophy or a threat? I asked. She smiled. It was a dazzling, shark's tooth smile. It is advice, darling. You are digging around in the past. Just be careful you do not dig up things that are better left buried. Sometimes, old files are missing for a reason, not because of a conspiracy, but because they are irrelevant, complicated. Like the payments to Obsidian Consulting? I asked. The smile froze on her face. It didn't disappear, but it stopped reaching her eyes. I do not know what that is, she said. I think you do. I said, I think you handle the narratives, And I think paying off people to stay quiet is part of the narrative. Elise set her glass down. The sound of the stem hitting the table was a sharp clink. You are smarter than you look. Vivian, she said softly, that is a dangerous quality. She reached across the table and patted my hand. Her skin was cold. If you are smart, she continued, you will focus on your little sorting project and collect your paycheck. You have a chance here to come back into the fold, to be taken care of. Do not throw it away because you think you are a detective. We protect our own. Vivian, but you have to decide if you are one of us. I looked at her. I saw the calculation in her eyes. She didn't care about the company, or the clients, or the truth. She cared about the structure. She was the gatekeeper. I'm just a consultant. Elise, I said, withdrawing my hand. Good, she said, signaling for the check. Keep it that way. She paid for the lunch I hadn't eaten. I walked back to the office with a knot in my stomach. They knew I was looking. Elise's warning was clear. Stop, or we will stop you. But I couldn't stop. That afternoon, I was browsing the shared drive again, looking for a distraction from the tension. I stumbled upon a folder nested deep within the marketing directory. It was labeled G_speeches, _drafts, _do, _not _ publish. I shouldn't have had access to it. It was likely a permission error. A digital door left unlocked by a careless intern. I opened it. There were dozens of documents. Speeches for charity events, board meetings, ribbon cuttings. I opened one from 5 years ago. It was titled Annual_shareholder_address_V1. I started reading, and I want to take a moment to admit that this year has been harder than I anticipated. We made mistakes in the second quarter. I made mistakes. I pushed too hard on the leverage, and I exposed us to risk that kept me awake at night. I want to thank my team for correcting my course. I am learning, even at this age, that leadership is not about being right, but about listening. I stared at the screen. Gordon Bryant admitting a mistake? Gordon Bryant thanking his team for correcting him? It was impossible. I opened the next version of the same speech. Annual_shareholder_address_final. This year has been a triumph of vision. Where others saw risk, we saw opportunity. We dominated the second quarter because we refused to flinch. Leadership is about instinct, and my instinct has never wavered. The humility was gone. The gratitude was gone. The humanity was scrubbed out, replaced by the blustering, invincible titan I knew. I opened another draft, a toast for a wedding. Draft, to my daughter. I know I have not always been easy. I know my expectations can feel like a weight, but I love you, and I am proud of the woman you are becoming. Final. To the happy couple. Marriage is a contract. Ensure you honor the terms. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of grief. Someone was rewriting him. I checked the metadata on the files. The last modified. By tag on all the drafts, the human ones, was G_Bryant. The last modified. By tag on all the final versions was E_Marrow or R_Klein. Elise and Rowan, they were editing him. They were stripping away his doubt, his apologies, his softness, and turning him into a caricature of strength because that was what sold. That was what the investors wanted. A god, not a man. And he let them. Or maybe he didn't even know. Maybe he just read what was put in front of him, trusting that they knew best how to make him look like a king. It made him smaller in my eyes. He wasn't the monster under the bed. He was a puppet. A cruel, damaged puppet, but a puppet nonetheless. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out. It was my mother. I stared at the screen. Leanne had not called me in 6 months. She avoided conflict like an allergy. Since she remarried, a nice, boring dentist named Paul, she tried to pretend the drama of the Bryant family was a TV show she used to watch but had canceled. I answered, "Mom? Vivian?" Her voice was breathless, high-pitched. "Oh, thank God. Are you okay?" "I am fine," I said. Why? Your father called me. She said. I stiffened. What did he say? He is worried sick. Vivian, he told me you are having a breakdown. What? He said you showed up at his office begging for a job, but that you are talking to yourself. He said you are paranoid. He told the aunts that you are off your medication. Vivian, tell me it isn't true. Tell me you aren't sick again. I closed my eyes. Again. There it was. The soft assassination. He knew he couldn't fire me for snooping without looking guilty, so he was destroying my credibility. If I came forward with evidence of fraud now, he would just point to this, my poor, sick daughter. She is imagining conspiracies. She is having an episode. He was planting the seeds of madness in the minds of everyone who knew me. Mom, I said, keeping my voice incredibly steady, listen to me. I am not sick. I am working. I am fine. But he said you were shaking. He said you couldn't look him in the eye. He is lying. Mom. There was a silence on the line. A long, painful silence. I knew that silence. It was the sound of her weighing the two narratives. On one side, the powerful, charismatic ex-husband who had dominated her life for 20 years. On the other, the daughter who had run away. I want to believe you, Viv, she whispered. But you know how you get when you are stressed. You withdraw. I am not withdrawing. I said, I am fighting. Fighting? She sounded terrified. Fighting what? Nothing, I said. I realized I couldn't tell her. She would crack. She would call him and beg him to go easy on me. And that would only confirm his story that I needed help. Just do not listen to him. Mom, please, just trust me for once. I have to go. Paul is waiting. Take care of yourself. Vivian, please. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. The office was empty now. The cleaners were starting their rounds, the vacuum humming in the distance. I sat alone in the pool of blue light from my monitor. He had turned my mother against me in a 5-minute phone call. He was efficient. I had to give him that. I looked at the pile of evidence I had gathered, the shipping logs, the hidden payments, the speech drafts. It wasn't enough to just have the facts. Daphne was wrong. If I walked into a courtroom with this today, Elise Marrow would leak a story to the press that I was a disgruntled, mentally unstable daughter acting out of vengeance. They would bring up my migraines. They would bring up my failure to handle the family legacy. They would paint me as crazy, and the world would believe them because the world loved Gordon Bryant. I opened a new document on my secure, ghost-looped laptop. I named it The Narrative. I began to type. I typed everything. The conversation with Daphne, the threat from Gordon, the lunch with Elise, the phone call with my mother. I wasn't just investigating a crime anymore. I was documenting a war. If they wanted to make this about who was believed, I had to make sure I was bulletproof. I had to show not just the fraud, but the machine that protected it. I typed until my fingers ached. You want to paint me as crazy. Dad? I thought, staring at the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Fine, but I am writing the history of this battle, and in my version, the dragon doesn't win. The creditors are getting restless. They want to pull the trigger on a formal audit next week. If we do not have the map by then, the audit will hit a wall of shredded paper and wiped drives. I need the report. I cannot give it to you yet, I said, staring at the rain sliding down the glass. Why not? You have the shipping logs. You have the payments to the shell companies. You have the ghost protocols on your laptop. That is enough to get a warrant. It is enough to get a warrant. I agreed, but it is not enough to survive what comes after. Daphne stopped typing. She turned to look at me. You are worried about your reputation. I am worried about the narrative. I said, you do not know these people. Daphne, you look at spreadsheets. I grew up in that house. If I hand you a half-finished puzzle, Gordon will not just deny it. He will destroy the person holding the pieces. He has already started telling the family I'm having a mental breakdown. If I come forward now with circumstantial evidence, I become the crazy daughter acting out a vendetta. The media will eat it up. The creditors will back off because they do not want to be associated with a family feud. And Gordon wins. I need a smoking gun. I continued, my voice hard. I need to show exactly where the money goes, who signs for it, and why. I need it to be so airtight that even his charm cannot suffocate it. Daphne held my gaze for a long moment, assessing me. Then she nodded. Once, you have 48 hours, she said. After that, we move, with or without you. I got out of the car and walked back toward the tower. The rain soaking into my blazer. 48 hours. It was not enough time to dismantle an empire, but it was all I had. That night, the office was a tomb. The cleaners had come and gone, leaving the smell of lemon ammonia hanging in the stagnant air. I sat in my cubicle, the only island of light on the 35th floor. Miles was there, too. He was officially running a server diagnostic, but in reality, he was sitting on the floor of my cubicle, his laptop balanced on his knees, eating a bag of pretzels with nervous, mechanical crunches. "We are close," he whispered. I traced the routing numbers from the Obsidian consulting payments. "And?" I asked, not looking away from my screen. "They do not go to a bank," Miles said. "They go to a clearinghouse account managed by the Silverbrook Futures Fund." "My father's charity," I said, "the one he is so proud of." Miles nodded. "It is a pass-through. Vivian, the money comes in from the client escrow accounts, gets washed through the Futures Fund as a charitable donation to avoid tax flags, and then gets paid out to these fixers. It is brilliant. Actually, who audits a charity for orphans?" I felt a sick churn in my stomach. The Silverbrook Futures Fund was the crown jewel of Gordon's public image. He gave speeches about it. He cried on stage about it, and it was just a laundry machine. "Show me the authorization." I said, "Who approves the transfers out of the fund?" Miles tapped a few keys. I pulled the digital signature logs. "It should be Gordon. He is the chairman. Or maybe Rowan." He turned his laptop toward me. I looked at the image on the screen. It was a scanned authorization form for a transfer of $300,000 to Brightwell Strategies. The signature at the bottom was not Gordon's sweeping, jagged scrawl. It was not Rowan's precise, architectural script. It was a tight, cramped knot of ink. I squinted at it. It looked like initials. J.V. "Who is J.V.?" I asked. "I do not know," Miles said. "There is no executive with those initials. No board member." I pulled up the personnel database on my own screen. I searched for J.V. Nothing. I searched for former employees. Nothing. Then I looked at the letterhead of the invoice from Brightwell Strategies. It was sparse. Just a name and a P.O. box in Delaware. I searched for Brightwell Strategies on the open web. Their website was a single page. No photos, no mission statement, just a line of text. Risk containment and strategic continuity. I ran a search on legal forums. I found a thread from 4 years ago on a paralegal message board. Someone was asking about opposing counsel in a harassment suit. Be careful. One comment read, "They brought in consultants from Brightwell. Those guys are not lawyers. They are cleaners. They dig up dirt on the plaintiffs until they drop the case. It is intimidation. Pure and simple." I sat back in my chair. This was the machine. Gordon did not just pay people off. He hired a firm that specialized in terrorizing them into silence. And the person signing the checks was a ghost named J.V. I need to find out who that signer is. I told Miles. Miles shook his head. That signature key is hard-coded into the approval system. It bypasses the standard user authentication. It is like a master key. Whoever has it does not even need to log in. I stared at the signature again. It felt familiar, in a way I could not place. It was old-fashioned. The ink pressure was heavy, like someone angry or in pain. "Go home, Miles," I said. "If they catch us both here, we are dead. What about you?" "I have one more file to check," I said. Miles left, his sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. I was alone. I decided to look closer at the script. I had found the speech drafts earlier, but I suspected there was more. If Elise Marrow was handling the narrative, she would have notes. She was a meticulous woman. She did not improvise. I used the access Miles had given me to slip into the back end of the Outlook Exchange server. I searched for emails between Elise and Gordon. There were hundreds, but one subject line caught my eye. Prep for V.B. Interaction. It was dated the morning of the staff meeting. The morning Gordon had cornered me, I opened it. Gordon, the email read. Regarding the interaction with Vivian today, do not engage with her on facts. If she brings up the work, dismiss it. Focus on her history. Remind her of her instability. Use the following phrases. 1. Begging for relevance. 2. Uneducated. 3. Who hired you? Implies conspiracy. Makes you look victimized. Keep her on the defensive. If she feels small, she will retreat. Do not let her speak. Anger is your shield. I read the email 3 times, begging for relevance. He had said exactly that. Who hired you? He had asked that, too. I felt a strange dislocation. I had spent my life thinking my father's cruelty was a natural force, like a thunderstorm. I thought he hated me because I disappointed him. But this was a script. He was being coached. Elise Marrow was feeding him lines to keep him aggressive because an aggressive Gordon was a predictable Gordon. If he was angry at me, he wasn't looking at the books. He wasn't asking where the money was going. I looked through the glass wall of my cubicle toward the executive suite. Gordon's office was dark. I hated him. I hated him for the years of neglect, for the public humiliation, for the way he made me feel like nothing. But in that moment, looking at the email, I also felt a profound, twisting pity. He thought he was the king, but he was just the loud distraction while the thieves stripped the castle. My internal phone rang. The sound shattered the silence. I jumped, my heart hammering. It was 11 o'clock at night. I looked at the display. R. Klein, Rowan. I picked up the handset. Hello? Vivian. Rowan's voice was warm, rich, and utterly relaxed. I noticed you were still logged in. You work too hard. I'm just finishing up. I said, come up to my office, he said. Have a drink with me. We should talk. It was not a request. I took the elevator up to the 40th floor. The executive level was different. The carpet was deeper. The art was real. Rowan was sitting behind his desk, his jacket off. His sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that looked like they belonged on a rowing champion. He was pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal tumblers. Vivian, he said, gesturing to a leather chair. Please, sit. I sat. I did not take the drink. Rowan smiled and took a sip of his own. Scotch, he said, 30 years old, tastes like peat moss and money. What do you want to talk about? Rowan, I asked. I want to talk about your future, he said. He set the glass down and leaned back, lacing his fingers together. You have been here for 2 weeks, he said. You are good. Vivian, better than good. Miles tells me you have optimized the archive retrieval by 40%. That is impressive for someone who, well, for someone with your history. I am good at my job. I said, yes, you are. And that is why I want to offer you a permanent position. I waited. Vice President of Internal Operations. Rowan said, it is a new role. We need someone to oversee the workflow between departments. Someone who understands the details but knows how to keep the big picture. Streamlined. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was an offer letter. The salary was $250,000 a year, plus bonuses, plus stock options. It is a lot of money, Rowan said softly. Enough to buy a very nice house, enough to stop worrying about rent, enough to prove to everyone, including your father, that you are a success. I looked at the number. It was life-changing money. And what do I have to do for this? I asked. Rowan smiled. It was a gentle smile, almost affectionate. You just have to be part of the team. Vivian, being part of the team means understanding that sometimes things are complex. Sometimes we have to do things that look unconventional to protect the firm. He leaned forward. Look, he said, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. I know your father is difficult. He is a dinosaur. He yells, he insults, he bullies. I know what he said to you at the GALA. It was disgusting. I blinked, surprised by his candor. Gordon is not the villain here. Vivian, Rowan continued. He is just a man under a lot of pressure. We protect him. Elise, me, the board. We manage him so he can be the figurehead, and we handle the dirty work. We keep the ship afloat. He gestured to the offer letter. I'm inviting you to join the adults at the table. Help us manage him. Help us keep Marlowe Capital strong. Stop asking questions about old files and start building a future. I looked at Rowan. He was charming. He was reasonable. He was offering me everything I had ever wanted. Respect, money, a chance to be inside. But I heard the silence behind his words. Stop asking questions. This wasn't a job offer. It was a bribe, and it was a test. If I took the paper, I was one of them. I would be complicit. I would be paid to look away when the signatures didn't match, when the money vanished, when the consultants destroyed someone's life, and if I refused, I looked at Rowan's eyes. They were flat, watchful, waiting for me to take the bait. I pushed the paper back across the desk. I cannot accept this. Rowan. His smile didn't waver, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Why not? He asked. Because I am just a consultant. I said, I have a contract to finish. I like to finish what I start. Rowan stared at me. He took another sip of his scotch. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, like a teacher whose student had failed a simple exam. That is a shame. Vivian, he said, loyalty is a rare commodity. We pay a premium for it. I stood up. Is that all? Yes, Rowan said. That is all. I walked to the door. My hand was on the knob when he spoke again. Vivian? I turned. Be careful on your way out, he said. The lights are off in the lobby. It is easy to trip in the dark. I walked out. My legs were shaking. I had just turned down a fortune, and I had just confirmed that I was a target. I went back to my desk. I knew I had to move. The 48 hours Daphne gave me had just shrunk to 0. Rowan knew I was a problem. He would not wait. I sat down and pulled up the Silverbrook Futures Fund accounts one last time. I needed to know where the money came from. I knew about the client escrow theft, but the volume was too high. There had to be other streams. I scrolled through the incoming donations tab. Most of the donors were shell companies, but there was a line item that appeared every month, like a heartbeat, a transfer of aggregated funds from a subsidiary called Community Scholarship Trust. The name stopped me cold. Community Scholarship Trust. 10 years ago, when I was 23 and working my first job, I had set up a recurring donation. It was small, $50 a month. It was for a local scholarship fund that helped kids from the Silverbrook foster system go to trade school. I had kept that donation running even when I was broke. It mattered to me. I wanted to help people who were starting with nothing, like I felt I had 2 years ago. I received a notice that the charity had been acquired and administrative handling would be moved to a larger umbrella organization. I hadn't paid attention. I just let the autopay continue. I clicked on the transaction details for the Community Scholarship Trust merger. Acquired by Silverbrook Futures Fund. Date, November 14th. I felt the blood drain from my face. My money, my $50 a month. It wasn't going to foster kids. It wasn't buying textbooks or welding gear. It was being absorbed into the Silverbrook Futures Fund. It was being mixed with the stolen client money. It was being used to pay Brightwell Strategies. I had been paying for my father's reputation firewall. I had been paying for the people who intimidated victims. I put a hand over my mouth, fighting the urge to vomit. The betrayal was so specific, so intimate. They didn't just steal from strangers. They stole from me. They took the one thing I did that felt pure, my small, silent contribution to the world, and they turned it into mud to patch the cracks in Gordon Bryant's statue. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and angry. No, I thought, no more. I opened the reporting software. I didn't care about being careful anymore. I didn't care about the ghost loop. I started dragging files into a single compressed folder, the speech drafts, the script from Elise, the shipping logs, the Brightwell invoices, the signature of JV, the merger documents for the scholarship fund. I was building the bomb. I typed a cover sheet. Report on systemic fraud and reputation laundering at Marlowe Capital. Prepared by Vivian Bryant. I hit save. I opened my email to send it to Daphne. I attached the file. I moved the cursor to the send button. The screen went black. I froze. A message appeared in the center of the monitor. In red block letters. Security violation detected. User access revoked. Remain at your station. My phone went dead. The desk line went dead. I heard the elevator ding. I stood up. I grabbed my purse. I touched the encrypted drive around my neck. My backup. I had the files. I just had to get out. I walked out of the cubicle into the hallway. 2 men were walking toward me. They were not the regular building security. They were wearing dark suits, no ties. They looked like the kind of men who worked for Brightwell. Vivian Bryant? The first one said. I am leaving. I said, keeping my voice level. We will escort you, he said. They flanked me. They didn't touch me, but they were close enough that I could feel their heat. They marched me toward the elevators. When the doors opened on the ground floor, the lobby wasn't empty. It was shift change for the night staff. There were 20 people there, janitors, late-night analysts, the cleaning crew, and standing by the front desk were Elise and Rowan. Rowan looked sad. Elise looked triumphant. The security men walked me through the turnstiles. The sound of the metal gate clicking shut behind me echoed like a gunshot. Ms. Bryant has been terminated for data theft and violation of corporate privacy policies, Elise said, her voice pitched perfectly to carry across the lobby. She turned to the security guard at the desk. Please log the incident. If she returns to the premises, call the police immediately. Everyone was looking at me. The analysts were whispering. The janitors looked down, embarrassed for me. It was the GALA all over again. The spotlight. The shame. The narrative being written in real time. She is unstable. She stole data. She is a criminal. I looked at Elise. I looked at Rowan. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't try to defend myself to the crowd. I looked straight at the security camera above the desk, knowing that somewhere, Gordon was watching on a monitor. I reached up and adjusted my collar, making sure the silver chain around my neck caught the light. I turned and walked out the revolving doors. The night air hit me, cold and wet. I was shaking, but not from fear. I was shaking from the sheer, kinetic energy of the truth I was carrying against my chest. They thought they had humiliated me. They thought they had thrown me out of the castle, but they didn't understand. I wasn't the princess who had been banished. I was the soldier who had just stolen the plans to the fortress. I walked into the rain, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like running away. I felt like running toward the fire. I did not sleep that night. I lay on the rug in my living room, staring at the ceiling fan cutting through the stagnant air. It was a rhythmic, mechanical slicing, whoosh, 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 that marked the passing of time in seconds I would never get back. This is how they kill you. I thought, not with a gun, but with a story. I replayed the scene in the lobby 100 times. Elise's voice, sharp and projecting like an opera singer's, terminated for data theft, instability, the way the janitors had looked at their shoes, the way Rowan had looked at me with that sad, paternal disappointment, as if he had tried to save a drowning dog that had bitten him. For 5 hours, I let myself spiral. It was a cold, quiet descent. I wondered if my father was right. Maybe I was small. Maybe I was just a bitter daughter trying to throw rocks at a tank. I had walked into their building, thinking I was a spy, and they had chewed me up and spat me out before I could even light the fuse. I thought about the encrypted drive resting against my collarbone. It felt heavy, like a stone. Did it even matter? If I released the files, Elise would release my medical records. She would release the narrative of the breakdown. The world would see a crazy woman attacking a philanthropist. I felt a terrifying urge to just stop, to take the drive, smash it with a hammer, move to a different state, and change my name. I could disappear. I was good at disappearing. But then the sun began to rise, turning the gray ceiling to a bruised purple. And with the light, the image of the spreadsheet returned to my mind. The Community Scholarship Trust. My $50. I thought about the years I had spent working overtime in the warehouse, standing on concrete floors until my knees locked, sending that money every month because I wanted to believe I was helping someone else escape the trap of being poor and unconnected. They had stolen that feeling from me. They had taken my sacrifice and used it to pay for their sins. I sat up. My muscles were stiff. My eyes were dry. But the spiral had hit the bottom, and I had found solid ground. I was not going to disappear. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Laundromat on 4th, 0800. Bring quarters. I knew who it was. I showered, washing the smell of the lobby out of my hair. I put on jeans and a hoodie. I walked to 4th Street. The laundromat was empty except for a woman reading a magazine and a man in the back corner, folding a pile of gray t-shirts with frantic precision. Miles looked terrible. His skin was the color of paste, and he had dark circles under his eyes that looked like bruises. When he saw me, he flinched. "Are you followed?" he asked, his voice cracking. "No," I said. "I checked." He shoved a laundry basket toward me, underneath a pile of socks. There was a small, silver USB stick. I copied the logs. He whispered. Before they cut the line, I saw the lockout command coming down from the admin server. I had about 30 seconds. I dumped the raw data from the ghost session and the root directory for the signature authorization. I stared at him. "Miles, if they find out you did this, I know," he said. He gripped the edge of the folding table. His knuckles were white. "I know what they do. I saw the payments to Brightwell. I know they destroy people." "Then why?" "Because I have a kid," Miles said. I blinked. "I didn't know that. She is 3, he said, "and I do not want to be the kind of father who saw a crime and just calibrated the screens while it happened. I am terrified. Vivian, I threw up this morning, but I am more terrified of being like them." I took the USB stick. It was warm from being in his pocket. "Thank you," I said. "Get out of here," he said, turning back to his laundry. "And Vivian? Do not miss." I walked 3 blocks to a cafe with public Wi-Fi. I didn't connect. I just sat in the back and waited for Daphne. She arrived 10 minutes later. She looked different, too. The crisp, surgical precision was gone. Her suit was wrinkled at the elbows. She looked tired. I slid into the booth opposite her. "I have it," I said. "I have the full map. The scholarship fund, the shell companies, the signature of the mystery signer, and the logs proving they were monitoring me." Daphne didn't smile. She didn't reach for the drive. She just looked at her coffee cup. "That is good," she said. "What is wrong?" I asked. The tone of her voice set off an alarm in my head. "We had a meeting this morning," Daphne said quietly. "The steering committee for the creditors. I briefed them on the preliminary findings. I told them we had strong evidence of systemic fraud. And they want to settle," she said. I felt the air leave my lungs. "What? They do not want a scandal." "Vivian, Marlowe Capital manages $40 billion. If this goes public, if it comes out that Gordon Bryant has been laundering client money, the market will panic. The value of the assets will crater. The creditors will lose pennies on the dollar." She looked up at me, her eyes hard and cynical. "They want to use your evidence as leverage." She said, "They want to go to Gordon quietly, show him the gun, and force him to pay them back with interest. Then they want to help him structure a correction that buries the whole thing. They want to make a deal." "And what about the people he stole from?" I asked, my voice rising. "What about the employees he silenced? What about the lies?" "They do not care." Daphne said, "They are banks. Vivian, they care about solvency. Justice is a line item they cannot afford." She reached across the table. "Give me the drive. Vivian, I can get you a payout. I can make sure part of the settlement includes a severance package for you. A non-disclosure agreement with a very healthy number attached. You can walk away. You can be safe." I looked at her hand. It was manicured, steady, and outstretched. It was the same offer Rowan had made me. "Just coming from a different direction. You told me he was afraid of me." I said, "He is," Daphne said, But money cures fear. If the creditors shield him, he survives. I pulled the drive back. No, I said. Vivian, be reasonable. You cannot fight this alone. They will crush you. They are already trying. I said, but I am not doing this for a payout. And I am not doing this for the creditors. I stood up. I am keeping the evidence. I said. Daphne looked at me with a mixture of frustration and respect. If you go rogue, she warned, the oversight group will disavow you. You will have no legal cover. I never had legal cover. Daphne, I was just a consultant. I walked out of the cafe. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still a heavy, threatening gray. I went back to my apartment and formulated a new plan. I realized I had made a mistake. I had been trying to play by the rules of their world. Audits, compliance, legal channels, but their world was rigged. The judges were bought, the juries were managed, and the police were private security guards in expensive suits. I needed to stop trying to win a court case and start trying to win the truth. I divided the evidence into two piles. Pile A was the technical fraud, the routing numbers, the tax evasion, the accounting tricks. That was for the SEC and the district attorney. That was the weapon that would put people in prison. Pile B was the narrative, the speech drafts, the script regarding my mental health, the scholarship fund theft, the payments to the intimidation firm. That was for the public. That was the weapon that would destroy the legend of Gordon Bryant. I encrypted both sets. I set up a dead man's switch on a secure server. If I didn't log in every 12 hours, the files would automatically be emailed to 3 major news outlets and the Department of Justice. Then, I prepared for the hardest part of the day. I drove to my mother's house. It was a beautiful house in the suburbs, manicured and silent. Leanne lived there with Paul. Surrounded by beige furniture and non-threatening art, it was the sanctuary she had built after escaping Gordon's orbit. She was in the kitchen, arranging flowers. When I walked in, she dropped a rose. Vivian, she breathed. I tried to call you back. I was so worried. I sat down at the granite island. I need you to listen to me. Mom, I said, I am listening. Are you okay? Do you need a doctor? I took a deep breath. I need you to stop. I said, stop what? Stop repeating his lies. I said, I know he called you. I know he told you I was having a breakdown. And I know that when the aunts called, or when your friends asked, you sighed and said, Vivian is struggling again. Leanne's face crumpled. I didn't mean, I just didn't know what else to say. He was so convincing. Vivian, he sounded so scared for you. He isn't scared for me. Mom, he is scared of me. I reached out and took her hands. They were trembling. I am not asking you to fight him. I said gently, I know you can't. I know you spent 20 years trying to survive him. And I know conflict makes you feel like you are dying. I am not asking you to stand up in court. I am not asking you to leave Paul and march in the streets. Then what do you want? She whispered. I want neutrality. I said, real neutrality. When people ask about me, I want you to say, Vivian is fine. Vivian is working. I want you to refuse to be his echo chamber. Leanne looked down at our joined hands. He will be so angry, she said. If I don't support him, he takes it as a betrayal. I know. I said, but if you support him, you are betraying me. She looked up. Her eyes were wet. He told me you were fired, she said. He said you stole things. I did. I said, I stole the truth. I squeezed her hands. I am going to finish this. Mom, tonight, I am going to the gala. The gala? You can't. He will have you arrested. He can't. I said, and I need to know that while I am walking into that fire, my own mother isn't outside holding the gasoline. Leanne pulled her hands away and covered her face. She cried for a minute, silent, shaking sobs. Then she wiped her eyes with a napkin. She looked at me. She looked older, tired, but there was a flicker of something new in her eyes. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was just resignation. You were always so stubborn, she said, even as a baby. You never cried when you fell. You just got up and looked at the ground like it had offended you. She stood up and walked to the fridge. She poured 2 glasses of iced tea. I won't say it anymore, she said. If he calls, I won't answer. Thank you. I said. That night, the Marlowe Capital Annual Gala was held at the Symphony Hall. It was the biggest event of the year, even bigger than the charity dinner. This was the shareholder meeting disguised as a party. I did not wear a sheath dress this time. I wore a suit. It was black, severe, and cut like a blade. I wore my hair down, sleek and straight. I wore red lipstick, a color of war. I arrived at the main entrance. The red carpet was swarming with photographers. Limousines were depositing men in tuxedos and women in gowns that cost more than my car. I walked up the steps. My heart was a cold, hard knot in my chest. Elise Marrow was standing at the check-in desk, holding a clipboard like a shield. She looked radiant and terrifying in emerald green. When she saw me, her smile vanished. She stepped out from behind the desk, blocking my path. You have got to be kidding me, she hissed. Good evening. Elise, I said. You are not coming in, she said, signaling to a large security guard standing nearby. You are trespassing. I told you. If you came back, I am not trespassing. I said, and I am not here as a guest. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a document. I snapped it open. I am here as a proxy for a voting shareholder. I said. Elise stared at the paper. What is this? It is a legal proxy form, I said, representing 4,000 shares of Marlowe Capital voting stock. Elise laughed. You don't have shares. You are broke. I didn't buy them all at once. I said calmly. I bought them over 10 years. $50 here, $100 there, every bonus I ever got, every tax refund. I put it into a generic index fund that holds Marlowe stock. And last week, I executed a right-to-vote transfer. I held the paper closer to her face. It is legitimate. Elise, it is notarized, and under the corporate bylaws of this company, any shareholder with voting rights is entitled to attend the annual meeting. The security guard stepped forward, looking at Elise for instruction. She wavered. She knew the bylaws. If she physically removed a legal shareholder in front of the press, who were standing 10 feet away, it would be a compliance nightmare. It would be a story. Daughter barred from shareholder meeting. She looked at the document. She looked at me. She saw that I wasn't shaking. Let her in. She spat. The guard stepped back. But Vivian? Elise whispered as I passed her. You are walking into a slaughter. He will skin you alive in there. I didn't answer. I walked past her, into the gold and velvet throat of the hall. The room was vast. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. 500 people were seated at round tables. At the front, the board of directors sat on a raised dais. Gordon was in the center. He looked magnificent. He was laughing at something the man next to him had said. He looked untouchable. I found my assigned table. It was in the back, of course. The overflow section for minor investors. I sat down. I waited. The dinner service began. Waiters moved like ghosts. I didn't eat. I watched Gordon. Eventually, his eyes scanned the room. It was inevitable. He always checked the house. His gaze swept over the back tables. It passed me, then snapped back. I saw the recognition. I saw the shock. But then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. It wasn't the cruel smile from the charity event. It was a satisfied, arrogant smile. He leaned over and whispered to Rowan. Rowan looked at me, then back at Gordon. They both nodded. He thinks I am here to plead. I realized. He thought I had broken. He thought the firing, the humiliation, the threat of the breakdown narrative had worked. He assumed I was there to catch his eye, to mouth an apology, to beg to be let back into the family. He couldn't imagine a version of me that wasn't asking for something. He raised his glass to me, a tiny, mocking toast. I didn't raise mine. I just stared at him. Enjoy the champagne, Dad. I thought, it is the last toast you will ever make. The dinner ended. The business portion of the evening began. I took out the second document I had brought, the report, the one with the JV signature. I needed to verify the signer before I spoke. I had a suspicion, but I needed certainty. I looked at the dais. The board members were all there. To Gordon's right sat the company's chief legal officer, a man named Marcus Thorne. To his left sat an older man, someone who wasn't technically on the board but was always there. He was a special advisor, a family friend, Julian Vance. I had known Julian my whole life. He was the man who gave me silver dollars on my birthday. He was the one who had taught me how to play chess when I was 10. He was the one person in Gordon's circle who had always been kind to me. He was the Uncle Julian who had whispered to me at my high school graduation, "Get out of here, Viv. You are too smart for this place." I looked at him. He was frail now, in his 70s, with shaking hands. He was drinking water. I looked at the signature on the copy of the Brightwell invoice in my lap. JV. The J was distinctive. It had a loop at the top, a flourish that looked like a backward number 7. I remembered something, a birthday card from my 12th year. To Vivian, "Happy birthday. Love, Uncle Julian." I closed my eyes, searching the memory. The J on the card, it was the same loop. My stomach dropped. It wasn't a faceless bureaucrat. It wasn't a hired gun. It was Julian. Julian Vance, the man who had told me to run. Was the one signing the checks for the intimidation firm. He was the one authorizing the hush money. He was the architect of the reputation firewall. I looked at him again. He was smiling at Gordon, patting him on the arm. The betrayal hit me harder than anything Gordon had ever done. Gordon was a narcissist. His cruelty was a symptom of his disease. But Julian? Julian was sane. Julian was kind. And Julian had sold his soul to protect Gordon's ego. He was the hidden decision-maker. He was the one who kept the hands clean. Gordon made the mess, and Julian, sweet, quiet Julian, paid the cleaners to wipe up the blood. I felt a wave of nausea. This was the web. It wasn't just corporate greed. It was a family of dysfunction, held together by money and silence. I stood up. The room was quiet. The secretary of the board was at the podium. "The floor is now open for shareholder questions," he said. Usually, this was a formality. A few planted questions about dividends, a polite clap. I walked toward the microphone standing in the center aisle. My heels clicked on the parquet floor. Clack, clack, clack. Heads turned. I saw Elise start to move from the side of the room. Her face panicked. I saw Gordon's smile fade. He looked confused. Why was I walking to the mic? Why wasn't I coming to the dais to beg? I reached the microphone. I gripped the stand. My hands were cold, but they were steady. I looked at the dais. I looked at Julian Vance, who was squinting at me through his glasses. I looked at Gordon, who was now leaning forward, his eyes narrowing into slits of blue ice. "State your name and share count," the secretary said. Looking bored, "Vivian Bryant," I said. My voice rang out, amplified, clear, and utterly calm. Holder of 4,212 voting shares. The room gasped. A collective, sharp intake of breath. Gordon stood up. "Vivian," he boomed, his voice laughing but edged with warning. "This is hardly the time for—" "I am not finished," I said. I cut him off. I interrupted Gordon Bryant in his own hall. I looked him in the eye. "I have a question regarding the financial disclosures for the Silverbrook Futures Fund," I said, specifically, the line items regarding payments to Brightwell Strategies. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had just landed but hadn't detonated yet. I saw Julian Vance drop his glass of water. It shattered on the table, the sound like a gunshot. Gordon's face went white. Not red, white. He knew. In that second, he knew that I wasn't there to beg. I was there to burn it down. And I was holding the match. The silence in the symphony hall was not the respectful hush of an audience waiting for a speech. It was the terrified vacuum that follows a car crash. The name Brightwell Strategies hung in the air like smoke, choking the room. Gordon stood at the dais, his knuckles white against the tablecloth. For the first time in his life, he did not have a quip. He did not have a deflection. He looked at me, and I saw the gears grinding in his mind, trying to calculate how much I knew and how he could spin it. Marcus Thorne, the chief legal officer, was the first to move. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with a sharp, professional snap. "Mr. Chairman," he said, his voice tight. "Given the nature of this inquiry, I move that we adjourn the public portion of this meeting and reconvene immediately in executive session." "Motion seconded," another board member said, almost too quickly. The room erupted into murmurs. Flashbulbs went off. Pop, 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 blinding white explosions that felt like artillery fire. Gordon looked at the crowd. He smiled, but it was a grimace, a rictus of panic. "My daughter," he announced to the room, his voice booming but shaking slightly. "She has a flair for the dramatic. We will sort this misunderstanding out in private. Enjoy the dessert." Security guards materialized at my elbows. They did not touch me. They knew better now. They escorted me not to the exit, but to the double doors behind the stage. I walked past Elise. She was pale, her red lips a stark slash of color on a face that had lost all its blood. She looked at the folder in my hand as if it were a bomb. "It is," I thought. We entered the boardroom. It was a long, windowless chamber lined with mahogany and portraits of dead men who had built this city. The air conditioning was humming. Gordon sat at the head of the table. Julian Vance sat to his left, looking at his hands. Marcus Thorne sat to the right. The other 7 board members filled in the sides, their faces grim. I stood at the opposite end of the table. I was the only person standing. Gordon cleared his throat. He put his hands flat on the table, trying to occupy space, trying to be the lion again. "All right," he said. "The doors are closed. We can stop the performance now. Vivian." He looked at the board members, offering them a conspiratorial roll of his eyes. "I apologize for this," he said to them. "As I mentioned to some of you, Vivian has been struggling with significant mental health challenges. She has become fixated, paranoid. It is a tragedy. Really. To see a child spiral like this." He looked at me with a pity that was weaponized. "Vivian, honey," he said, "put the papers down. We are going to get you a car. We are going to get you the help you need. You are making a scene, and it is embarrassing. The old Vivian, the one from 10 years ago, would have cried. She would have screamed that she was sane. She would have tried to argue with his emotion, but I was not that girl." I placed the folder on the table. I did not open it yet. I looked at the board members. I ignored Gordon completely. "My name is Vivian Bryant," I said. My voice was low, steady, and stripped of all inflection. "I hold a Bachelor of Science in Business Analytics, summa cum laude. I hold a master's certification in forensic accounting. I am a certified supply chain professional." Gordon scoffed. A loud, wet sound. "She is lying," he said. "She works in a warehouse. She didn't even finish college." I continued, locking eyes with Marcus Thorne. "I have spent the last 2 weeks working as a compliance consultant within this firm." I said, "I was hired by the Creditors Oversight Committee to map internal data structures. I am not here as a daughter. I am here as an auditor, and I am here as a voting shareholder." Marcus Thorne froze. He looked at Gordon. "You said she was uneducated." Thorne said, "You said she was a risk." "She is," Gordon snapped. "She bought a degree online. It is a fantasy." I opened the folder. I took out the first document. It was a copy of my transcript, notarized. I slid it down the long table. It hissed against the wood. Thorne picked it up. He glanced at it. He looked at me with a new expression. It wasn't warmth. It was calculation. He was realizing that I was a credible threat. The room shifted. I could feel it. The oxygen changed. 10 minutes ago, I was a hysterical daughter crashing a party. Now, I was a professional with a paper trail. Gordon's attempts to cast me as a crazy child were landing flat. He was mocking a woman who was standing still, speaking clearly, and holding legal documents. His contempt didn't look like strength anymore. It looked like volatility. It looked like fear. "What do you have?" Ms. Bryant? Thorne asked. I have the truth. I said, and I'm going to give it to you chronologically. I took out the spreadsheet of the Silverbrook Futures Fund. Point 1. I said, for the last 5 years, Marlowe Capital has been moving client escrow funds, money legally required to be ring-fenced, into the Silverbrook Futures Fund. These transfers are tagged as temporary liquidity loans. They are never repaid. I slid the tracking logs down the table. The board members leaned in. They were not looking at Gordon. They were looking at the numbers. Point 2. I said, the Futures Fund is not a charity. It is a washing machine. The funds are aggregated and then paid out to a network of shell entities: Obsidian Consulting, Brightpath Logistics, Clearview Strategic. I slid the invoices down the table. Gordon stood up. This is absurd, he shouted. These are legitimate vendors. We use consultants for sensitive projects. Sit down. Gordon, a board member said. It was the woman from the pension fund. Her voice was cold. Let her finish. Gordon looked at her, shocked. He sat down slowly. Point 3. I said, the services provided by these vendors are not consulting. They are silence. I took out the timeline I had built. August 12th. I read, a sexual harassment claim is filed against a VP. August 14th. $250,000 is paid to Obsidian Consulting. The claim is withdrawn the next day. January 10th. A whistleblower threatens to go to the SEC. January 12th. $150,000 is paid to Brightpath. The whistleblower recants and resigns. I looked at the board. You are not paying for advice. I said, you are paying for intimidation. You are using client money to bury your own liabilities. This is not just unethical. It is grand larceny, and it is a RICO predicate. The room was deadly silent. Marcus Thorne was rubbing his temples. He knew. He was a lawyer. He knew I had just described a criminal enterprise. But who signed? Gordon whispered. He was grasping for a lifeline. I didn't sign those checks. You can't prove I knew. He was throwing his subordinates under the bus. He was preparing to blame Rowan. I looked at Julian Vance. He was staring at the water pitcher in the center of the table. He looked like he was praying. No, Gordon, I said, you didn't sign them. You are too careful for that. You needed someone you trusted, someone who would do anything to protect the image of the great Gordon Bryant. I took out the signature card, the JV, with the backward loop. I slid it toward Julian. Julian? I said softly. Julian flinched. He looked up at me. His eyes were wet behind his glasses. I am sorry. Vivi, he whispered. He used my childhood nickname. Gordon turned to stare at Julian. His mouth fell open. He hadn't known. That was the irony. He had given the order to fix it, and Julian had fixed it. But Gordon had never bothered to ask how. Julian. Gordon gasped. What did you do? I protected you, Julian said, his voice trembling. You wanted the problems to go away. Gordon, you said, make it stop. So I made it stop. I hired the firms. I signed the checks. I did it so you could stand on that stage and be the hero. The admission hung in the air. Julian Vance, the family friend, the advisor, the uncle. He was the bagman. The board members were recoiling. They were looking at Gordon and Julian like they were radioactive. I have one more thing. I said. I reached into the folder and pulled out the merger documents for the Community Scholarship Trust. This was the hardest part. My hands shook, just once, before I steadied them against the table. For 10 years. I said, I have donated $50 a month to a scholarship fund for foster children. It was not much. It was everything I could afford. I worked double shifts to pay it. I drove a car that broke down in the rain to pay it. I looked at Gordon. I did it because I wanted to build something real. I said, I wanted to be part of a solution. I wanted to be the opposite of what you said I was. I tapped the document. 2 years ago. Your fund acquired that charity. I said, you absorbed it. And for the last 2 years, my $50, my money, earned with sweat and discipline, has been funneled into the Silverbrook Futures Fund. My voice cracked, but I forced it back into steel. You took my money. And you used it to pay the people who harass women. You used it to pay the people who threaten whistleblowers. You made me pay for your firewall. I looked at the board. Gordon Bryant mocked me as uneducated and worthless. I said, he told the world I was a failure, but the truth is, while he was stealing from his clients to buy applause, I was quietly building a life of contribution. I was the one acting with honor. He was the one acting like a parasite. Gordon looked down. For the first time, he could not meet my eyes. The shame he had tried to put on me was reflecting back on him, magnified by 10 years of lies. Suddenly, the door to the boardroom burst open. Elise Marrow marched in. She looked frantic. She had a tablet in her hand. She didn't look at the board. She looked straight at me. "This is illegal," she shouted. "She is stealing proprietary data. I have a statement ready for the press. We need to release it now." She tapped the screen and held it up. Official statement. Marlowe Capital is saddened to report that Vivian Bryant, suffering from an acute manic episode, has attempted to disrupt shareholder proceedings. The allegations made are the fabrications of a troubled mind. We ask for privacy as we seek her medical commitment. It was the nuclear option. They were going to commit me. Gordon looked up. He saw the statement. A flicker of hope crossed his face. He could still win. If they could paint me as crazy right now, the evidence would be tainted. "Yes," Gordon said, standing up. "Yes, she is unwell. You can see it. Look at her aggression." I looked at Elise. "I have one more file," I said. I took out my phone. I connected it to the Bluetooth speaker system in the center of the table. I hit play. The audio was crisp. It was the recording Miles had pulled from the server, the phone call between Elise and Gordon. Elise's voice filled the room. "Gordon, regarding the interaction with Vivian today, do not engage with her on facts. If she brings up the work, dismiss it. Focus on her history. Remind her of her instability. Use the following phrases: begging for relevance, uneducated. Who hired you?" Gordon's voice. "She is persistent. It is annoying." Elise's voice. "It is not annoying. It is an opportunity. If you frame her as crazy now, no one will believe her later. Keep her on the defensive. If she feels small, she will retreat." I hit stop. The silence that followed was total. Elise lowered the tablet slowly. She looked at the floor. She knew she was done. The recording proved it wasn't a medical diagnosis. It was a strategy. It was a script. They had conspired to destroy my sanity to protect their fraud. I looked at Gordon. His face had changed. The anger was gone. The panic was gone. He looked at me with a dawning, terrible recognition. He realized, finally, that the room did not belong to him. He realized that the weapon he had used against me for 33 years, shame, the idea that I was small, the idea that I was broken, had stopped working. I wasn't small. I was the giant in the room. "Vivian," Gordon said. His voice was a rasp. I looked him in the eye. "I am not the daughter you refused to know." I said, "And I am not the professional you tried to erase. I am the person who survived you. And I will not negotiate my humanity for your approval ever again." I turned to the board. "The evidence is on the drive." I said, "Copies have been sent to the SEC and the district attorney." Marcus Thorne stood up. He didn't look at Gordon. He looked at the secretary. "I move that we place Gordon Bryant on immediate administrative leave, pending an external investigation," Thorne said, "and I move that we terminate the employment of Elise Marrow and Julian Vance for cause, effective immediately." "Seconded," the pension woman said. "All in favor?" Every hand went up. Gordon stood there. He looked at the hands raised against him. He looked at Julian, who was weeping silently. He looked at Elise, who was staring at the wall. Then he looked at me. He looked at me as if I had walked up to him and ripped the heart out of his chest. He looked at me as if I had stolen his life. He didn't see the theft he had committed. He didn't see the lies. He only saw that I had beaten him. He slumped back into his chair. He looked old. I turned and walked to the door. "Ms. Bryant," Thorne called out. "Wait, we need to discuss the settlement of the—" I kept walking. I don't want your settlement, I said without turning around. I walked out of the boardroom. The hallway was quiet. The music from the GALA drifted in from the main hall, a cheerful, oblivious jazz tune. I leaned against the wall. My legs felt like water. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that didn't smell like fear. I heard the door open behind me. I turned. It was Gordon. He was alone. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. His tuxedo jacket was unbuttoned. His tie was loose. He walked toward me, but he didn't march. He shuffled. He stopped 3 feet away. He looked at my face, searching for something. "Why?" he asked. His voice was barely audible. I waited. "Did you do it to destroy me?" he asked. "Or did you do it to save me?" It was the ultimate narcissist's question. Even in his defeat, he wanted to be the center of my motivation. He wanted to believe I hated him enough to burn the world, or loved him enough to force him to stop. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had mocked me, erased me, and weaponized my own mother against me. I felt a sudden, profound calm. "I didn't do it for you, Gordon," I said. He blinked. "I did it so you can't lie about me anymore." I turned my back on him. I walked down the long, empty hallway toward the exit signs. I didn't look back to see if he was watching. I didn't care. I walked out into the night. The rain had cleared. The air was crisp and clean. I took the silver chain off my neck and held the drive in my hand for a moment. Then I dropped it into my pocket. I walked toward the street, where the streetlights were humming with a steady electric sound. I was Vivian Bryant. I was educated. I was worthy. And I was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey walking in Vivian's shoes as she reclaimed her truth. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below with your city or country. If you enjoyed this story of justice and resilience, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Vivian did the right thing by refusing the settlement? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for your time.